years in the making. We've been doing this, I think, this is our fourth year, but this is the first time we've done AI plus OER, and we're very excited about that. I am Kristen Copeland. I am the Dean of Library and Learning Innovation at Clover Park Technical College in Washington State. I am going to be very brief this morning because we have a lot of really great presenters coming to you this year, and we want to give them as much time as possible. So I just want to quickly give my thanks to all the presenters that have put in lots of time to prepare for you today, and also my team that has done this as well as everything else on top of their workload. It is a large undertaking to create a free and open event, and I just want to give special recognition to them for this because it's not an easy task. So I really want to thank them. I'm going to quickly, and you'll know them by the backgrounds, so you can thank them as well as we go through, and they'll be your hosts throughout the day in different capacities introducing presenters. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Kane to introduce our keynote for this morning. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We're really happy that you're with us today.
Yes, I have the pleasure and honor to introduce Lucas Wright, who's a senior education consultant at the University of British Columbia. There, Lucas supports faculty and staff in integrating technology in their teaching and learning practice. He is an adult learning instructor with more than 15 years of experience teaching adults online, face-to-face, and in blended contexts. Lucas supports professional development programs at the CTLT, including the Instructional Skills Workshop, Teaching in a Blended Learning Environment, and the Learning Technology Hub, and the edX Studio Sessions. And I personally have attended his workshops, and I can attest that this guy is the real thing, and we're thrilled to have him here with us today. So
What
take it away.
what a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me. So I'm Lucas Wright. I'm your neighbor over here in Vancouver, Canada. I don't think we're too far away here. And I'm just a quick story before we get going. I've been really interested in generative AI since 2022, so not that long with the emergence of ChatGPT 3.5. But for me, I don't have great written output. So I think one of the draws that have with generative AI is my whole life I've had challenges with my writing. And this is the first time I've been able to really feel comfortable with what I write. So that's kind of what has drawn me here. Um, so great to meet all of you. And we have 55 minutes today. And what I'd like to do in that 55 minutes is to run a more interactive type session with you. So I've put a link in the chat with you for you now, a bit.ly link. And if you click on that link, once you get past the splash page there, what you'll find is a worksheet. And on that worksheet, you'll find all of the activities we do, all of the resources that we talk about today. I think part of the reason that I do worksheets and that I think getting you into these tools and playing with them is so important is you only have one day today. We only have 55 minutes together. And I think at the heart of learning about generative AI and thinking about generative AI is a sense of play and playing with these models a little bit. So I'd ask you to open the worksheet, and at the same time, for one of the activities, if you don't mind opening your favorite LLM, so it could be ChatGPT, it could be Copilot, it could be Gemini. If you really don't want to, you don't need to as well. So today we're going to talk about Gen AI and open educational resources in teaching and learning, and kind of the overall buckets in the next 55 minutes. We're going to talk about how Gen AI can be used to support and enhance the creation of OER, considerations of the use of Gen AI for OER, and then future implications for OER. So again, I've shared a worksheet with you. It's right up here if you didn't get it, and I'll get you to follow along with me on the worksheet. So I'd like to start with a quick intro to thinking about open educational resources and generative AI. And I want to start with what is OER. And I'm sure that if you're at this event, you're relatively familiar with OER. But a reminder that OER stands for Open Educational Resources, and there are millions of them out on the web. So on the top right, you'll see some textbooks from OpenStax. On the left, you'll see a video from TED, which is all openly licensed. Wikimedia Commons. On the lower right, I have an example of a simulation. So not only are there lots of OER out there, there's a lot of variety of OER. But before we talk more about OER, I want to do a quick activity with you using the chat. And if you haven't done this sort of activity, some people call it a chatterfall, some people call it 1, 2, 3, go. What I'd like you to do in a moment is to think about one or two of the values that you feel undergird or are the foundation of open educational resources. So, for example, for me, one of the values that I think are embedded in open educational resources is the idea of collaboration. So, collaboration between faculty to create resources. So what I'd like you to do now is go into the chat and I'd like you to write a value in the chat, but don't click enter until I tell you. So again, think about one value that is at the foundation of OER, write it in the chat, but don't click enter until I tell you to. Okay, I'll give you about 10, 15 seconds to do that. And I see there's some intros going in the chat as well now, which is great. But again, write down one value. Don't click enter until I tell you. Okay, I'm going to give you another 10 seconds on this step. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Click enter now. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And, if you have a chance, scroll through the comments now. You'll see accessibility, equity, access, equity again, gives ideas, share knowledge, free, equity, right to education. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And as you can see from the comments, there's a huge focus on access and accessibility. I want to go over a couple other kind of foundational values at the core of OER. I think one that all of you were touching on there was accessibility and access. So the ability to make open educational resources available to everyone or as many people as possible, and also affordable. Secondly is equity. So the idea of learning equity, so that we're not thinking about cost in learning, we're able to think about more equitable learning spaces that are inclusive. Finally, I think enhancing teaching and learning, one of the core values of open educational resources is they're about teaching and learning, and they're really thinking about that space and how they can support it. And finally, as I mentioned, often OER is developed via collaboration and community in things like sprints, where faculty come together and build these tools. So these are a couple of OER values, and I want to keep you to keep these in your mind as we go towards the end of the workshop. We're going to reference them again. So just a kind of a quick word on what is generative AI, and we're not going to spend much time here. A reminder that AI is not new, more than 60 years of history with AI in education. In 2022, generative AI really emerged, I think, into the public noticed it and how powerful it was becoming with natural language. But what is it? And I think at the heart of generative AI is complex word prediction. So this is an example from an article by Murgia, kind of showing how generative AI uses probability to predict the next word. This is why I think early on as generative AI came out, a lot of people were calling it things like a fancy autocomplete. I think for any of you who've used generative AI, it's far beyond a fancy autocomplete, but acknowledging it's not reasoning, it's not thinking, and some of the errors that it makes are directly related to its architecture. So, what is generative AI trained on? And I think this really links with the idea of open. One, this data is from ChatGPT 3.5. Since ChatGPT 3.5, a lot of the companies have obscured this data, which brings up issues around transparency. So ChatGPT 3.5 was trained off Common Crawl. Common Crawl is a web archive tool which should archive 13 years, petabytes of web data, billions of pages in over 40 languages, and trillions of links. Not the whole web, select websites within that archive. Secondly, Books 3. This has been a very controversial database that ChatGPT 3.5 was trained on. It was controversial because I'm sure that you've read about this in the news. A lot of books that were copyright were scraped within Books 3 and were used for training data. And finally, all of the data in Wikipedia. There's lots of other areas and ways these tools have been trained, but these were kind of the core databases used to train ChatGPT 3.5. That's kind of a brief intro to OER and generative AI. And what I'd like to work through in the next part is how we can leverage Gen AI to create and adapt OER. And keeping in mind as we go through this that I think there's some really significant challenges with the alignment of OER and AI. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. I wanted to start by talking about some of the opportunities because AI is making a huge difference in how we think about open educational resources. So I want to start with this image of different ways to use OER. As we know, OER allows you to adopt open textbooks and use them in your classes. It allows you to adapt open textbook, change to your context, remix them, perhaps combine different OERs, and create. And what we can do is when we think about these different ways that we create OER, we can think about where generative AI can fit into this picture. And I want to turn it over to you now. So I'm going to do a demo right now. And after that demo, I'm going to get you to try the same thing. I want to create a textbook chapter with you around OER. And again, I'm going to demo this, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. And kind of understanding, I've worked in open quite a while. And if you haven't worked on an open textbook, the amount of time to create open textbooks is absolutely astounding. I think a lot of faculty run into the challenges of just how much time it takes to create these books. And in academia, in some ways, faculty time is the highest currency. So I've taken this prompt here. As a psychology professor, write a 1,000-word extremely detailed textbook section of a chapter for first-year college students on the process involved in sleep. Include learning objectives at the start and a glossary of terms at the end, as well as 4 quiz questions. Notice in that prompt, I've given the prompt a role, act as a psychology professor. I've also been very detailed, both in what I'm looking for as well as the prompt output. So I'm going to go to ChatGPT. Oh, it looks like my computer's still on 4, which is great. My phone is updated to 5. And I'm going to put in this prompt now. And here's the result we're getting. So you'll see that it's correctly identified the different aspects of learning. A quick read through those LOs, they're pretty reasonable. It's breaking down the sleep cycle now, etc. It may not get to exactly 1,000 words. I find that generative AI isn't great at word counts, but it is really outlining this textbook. So I'd like to turn it over to you, which I know is a little unusual for a keynote. I'd like to give you about 3 minutes, not a really exact time in this case. And I'd like you to take this prompt. So as a psychology professor, write a 1,000-word extremely detailed textbook section. And I'd like you to adapt the prompt for your discipline or your area of expertise. Once you've adapted the prompt, drop it into ChatGPT, create a textbook page, and then briefly evaluate it. All right, so that's activity one. And I'm going to give you, we'll go 4 minutes on this activity. I'm going to stop sharing now, give you 4 minutes to do that. And after you've done that, I'm going to ask you to kind of share the output or the quality of the output. So go ahead, I'll start my 4 minute timer. I will warn you, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and 4 minutes can range from 1 minute to 10 minutes. I'll try to keep it around 4 minutes though. So go ahead, give that prompt a try. And Daniel Charker asks in the chat, how do we fact check GPT when it gives us data like this? I think that's a really important point. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I think the fact checking and the going through these resources can be very significant use of time that we need to think about. Can access, will we be able to have access to your slides later? 100%, also mentioning that these slides are CC BY. Please feel free to reuse them if that's helpful for you. I'm going to give you another minute to run this prompt. And, you know, as we're doing this, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. So 30 seconds. Jai asks, shall I add diagrams and process flowcharts? If you want, go for it. I love it. Taking it up a notch. Okay. So can I get a couple folks, or can people share in the chat 1 or 2 words of how they would evaluate the output? So you might say, you know, 5 out of 10, or this is too general, etc. So I'll give you a minute or so. Just put in the chat. A little too simple. So I see an 8 out of 10. Surprisingly accurate. Very basic. Interesting. See if another couple folks want to add. Right on target. Slightly general, 7 out of 10. And we do have this kind of generic textual output that can happen. A good skeleton. Thanks so much for sharing all of those. All right. So that was just a chance. So I hear an unremarkable. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. So that was a chance to kind of play with creating OER a little bit, and a chance to be a little bit more active during today's workshop. And I'd like to go back to our diagram, and we've kind of thought a little bit about create now. We can create textbook, textual content, media, video, images, music now. And then when we think about online things we can create with vibe coding, we're seeing people creating websites, creating simulations, creating applications. So again, creation in OER can be such a significant and challenging area. I think generative AI has really helped us in some ways in this area. The next thing I wanted to mention is adapting OER. And adapting OER is something, again, that generative AI has been quite good at. And these tools, when developing OER in my previous role at BC Campus supporting it, the adaption challenges is also very significant for OER. So it's one thing to get a text, one thing to get a resource, but how are we going to specifically adapt that for our classroom context? And I want to do a demo for you around adapting now. If you would like, you can follow along with me with this demo, but I'm not going to give you any additional time to do this. So what I've done is I've taken a text from an open textbook about clear communication by Matt Crossland. And what I can do with this is I can start transforming this text using generative AI. So I'm just going to pop this into ChatGPT now. I'll grab a new chat. And I'm just using ChatGPT right now because I'm most familiar with it. You could use this with any generative AI. So I have this clear communication textbook. And now what I can do is transform it in a couple different ways. So the first way that I'm going to transform it is I'm going to say act as a learning designer and adapt the following OER for grade 12 level learners. So what that's going to do now is it's going to transform the communication textbook now into lower level language. You'll see it's using more relatable language, more accessible language. So we can shift levels now very quickly with OER. The second way that I wanted to change it is to translate it. So I'm just going to say now act as an expert in translation and translate this into French. Wonderful. So now it's giving me a French translation of that. Although I am from Canada, I don't speak French. And as someone pointed out in the chat, I think one of the challenges here is how we are going to fact check and understand the quality of the outputs. The next way that I wanted to change it is, and I'm not going to demo this one, but I'm going to give you an example. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to give you an example of changing it into a visual. So I took that same textual content, I pasted it into ChatGPT, and I asked it to create an infographic based on this. And this is the infographic that it came up to. So again, I'm able to take content now and translate it, change the level, make it more accessible in different ways that we haven't been able to before. And I wanted to share one example of how a faculty member at UBC has done this. So they've used ChatGPT as well as a tool around voice, and they've taken their open textbook. And what they've done is they've added different voices to their open textbook so that it fits UDL. It's more open to different learners. So here's an example of the fairy tale version of their textbook.
Foundations: communication in natural resources. Communication is powerful. It shapes.
And I'll just play one other for you, the documentary version.
Foundations: communication in natural resources. Picture this. You're deep in the forest, surrounded.
I won't play any more there, but what Dr. Neil Leverage did there, he's in forestry communication at UBC, as he took this whole textbook for each of the different sections, he copied it into a tool called 11 Labs and created a different voice and kind of a different genre and tone around the text. What's interesting about this is when he asked his students which version they were listening to the most, they said all of them, which I think is really interesting when we think about UDL. So AI or generative AI has the ability to adapt resources quite easily and transform them into different ways. And again, this was a significant gap in open education. I'm not going to demo this now, but remixing OER is something that generative AI is also quite effective at. And I'll give you an example from my own work. Right now, I'm developing a student course around AI for an organization in Vancouver. And what we're doing is we're taking multiple openly licensed student courses around AI. We're curriculum mapping them, and then we're using generative AI to remix them into a single course. So again, we have different opportunities in remixing than we've had previously. So lots of different opportunities when we think about generative AI in open education. And to be honest, I've worked in open education off and on now for about 15 years. And I think this is the biggest change I've seen. I really think it's going to change our understanding of OER and deal with some of those challenges that faculty had, staff had in creating it. But with that comes some very significant tensions and issues that I think arguably could challenge the entire notion of OER as we know it. And I'd like to walk through a few of those tensions with you. Number one is copyright, and I would add to copyright attribution. As someone who's worked in open education for many years, I've worked with a lot of faculty and a lot of groups to help them get their materials online with the understanding that when those materials were up, they would be acknowledged, they would be attributed to them. With generative AI and the training, in a way, we've lost that attribution ability. And there's also a lot of questions about copyright. As you know, right now, there's a number of cases going through the US courts. Generally, these cases so far have found that training generative AI falls under fair use, which does allow for its use. But I think all of these cases are hinging on this one question. Is training AI on copyrighted works transformative enough to be protected under fair use or not? And again, so far, at least in the US cases, it seemed that training is relatively transformative enough to be fall under fair use. Secondly is privacy, intellectual property, and the entire web. And when I do workshops around generative AI, one of the questions I get a lot is, if I use ChatGPT, is the model going to use what I put into it to train it? The answer is yes, probably. But if you use anything on the internet, or most sites on the internet now, what you do there is also being used for training data. So if you use Reddit, if you've used Facebook, if you use X, any tool that you've used, generally these tools are being scraped. And we're also seeing this scraping in publications. So faculty are publishing articles, publishing textbooks, and companies are selling these papers to generative AI to train. We're seeing it with social media companies. We're seeing it with web searches. So I think it's really changed our understanding of privacy and what we put online. If we put something online now, regardless of its copyright status, there's a good chance it's going to be used for training AI tools. And as someone pointed out in the comments, how am I going to fact check this? And we know that generative AI is 100% confident, but maybe 70% accurate. And these errors, as well as biases, are more and more creeping in to the web content we see every day, as well as when we create an open textbook, we need to think about how we're going to deal with these. One really interesting example right now is Google AI overviews. If you followed Google AI overviews much, what you'll know is a lot of the writing says that they are single-handedly destroying web search. So people are going to AI overviews and they're not bothering to click on the websites afterwards. So they're getting their information in a different way. Yet, Google summaries have been filled with inaccuracies. And here's an example, someone asking if he can use gasoline to cook spaghetti. It says, no, you can't use it to cook spaghetti faster, but you can use it to make a spicy spaghetti dish. So again, thinking about the internet as a whole, what does it mean to have these inaccuracies online? Here's another great example. In May of this year, the Chicago Tribune wrote a summer reading list for 2025. And clearly the reading list had been generated, at least partially, with AI. it produced a number of fake books. For example, Tidewater Dreams was not a book written by Isabel Allende. The Rainmakers also was not written by Percival Everett. So again, how are we going to sift through and evaluate the quality of the outputs with generative AI? And how do we think about the overall veracity and health of the web? We can also think, and I noticed a lot of you talked about this in your values, um, how we deal with equity with generative AI. On one hand, we know that generative AI in some ways is improving access to learning. It can act as a scalable tutor for many of our students. We know that it can support personalized instruction. And for students with accessibility challenges, it's been a huge change for them in many cases. On the other hand, we know that AI raises privacy concerns for many students. We know that some students do not like using generative AI for ethical reasons, and that there's a pay-to-play culture already embedded within generative AI, where if you pay enough money, you can get a higher quality result. So how do we think about this in terms of learner equity? So kind of the last section I wanted to touch on now is thinking about OER as evolving. I think what we've touched on so far is that generative AI has the capabilities to really transform how we create, adapt, remix OER. What I've also mentioned though, is that OER itself and the web in a way is under threat by the inaccuracy of the information created by AI, by some of the equity and pay to play issues with these tools, as well as other issues. So this brings us to the point is, what is OER going to become in the next few years? And I think more importantly is, how can we shape what OER becomes? So some changes in OER that we're seeing, and I think some big questions around OER. We can start with the idea of Creative Commons licensing. We know, I've created these slides, I have a CC BY on them. But now when I upload these slides, I don't know if they're going to be reused by someone with attribution, or I don't know if they're going to be used to train AI without attributing my ideas. So is licensing as a whole breaking down, or is there still a space for Creative Commons licensing and an importance for it? Number two, will textbooks remain a central way to share knowledge? So we've seen a number of shifts in open education. Generative AI allows us to move towards more dialogue. And I'll give you a quick example of this. When I develop a workshop now, rather than doing a follow-up email, I send out a chatbot, and I've trained the chatbot, I've uploaded documents to it so someone can talk through the workshop with us. When we think about some of the courses that we often do as university staff or faculty, where we need to go through, do a quick click through to show compliance around something. Will those courses still exist, or in the future, will they become more dialogue-based, chatbot-based tools? And number three, and we've touched on this a little bit, is who determines the quality of AI-generated OER? And quality has been an important aspect of OER since its inception. And how do we maintain trust in OER? So one of the changes, and they talk about this in the Microsoft 2023 Future of Work report, is the movement of text to dialogue. And I think we can also think about this in terms of textbooks. And David Wiley, who's written quite a bit around open education, OER, and open content, says, what if in the future educators didn't write textbooks at all? What if instead we only wrote structured collections of highly crafted prompts? Or he could have said, what if instead we created chatbots that our students could use for different aspects of the course? So I want to demo this for you, similar to what I've done before. And I'm going to give you a chance to do this as well. So I'll give you a couple minutes after, but I'm going to go back to the idea of sleep, which is the original textbook I was writing. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to see if I can change it into a prompt-based learning tool. So create 5 questions that will test my understanding of sleep science. Ask me the questions one at a time, wait for my answer, then give me feedback, then ask the next question. We know that there's some new versions of tools like ChatGPT coming out, which are going to be more Socratic in nature and will do the question asking back and forth. But for now, by using things like ask me questions one at a time, wait for my answer, you're going to help it become more Socratic rather than giving you a big block of questions. So here we go. Let's try these out now. Let's get started with your sleep science quiz. What are 2 main types of sleep? How do they differ in terms of brain activity? I really don't know my sleep well, except I didn't get enough last night. Deep sleep and REM sleep. Apologies if there's sleep experts out there for my errors here. You're right on track. These are indeed. Here's a quick breakdown. So it's breaking it down for me a little bit. And once it's done that, it'll ask the next question. So over to you. I'd like you for a couple minutes, like we did before. I'll give you about 4 minutes. Change that prompt. So that is activity 3 to fit your own discipline, and go back and forth with it for a couple minutes just to get a feeling for the quality of the output. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to check in the chat. Please, again, feel free to ask questions and make comments there. I just want to draw attention to a really good critical comment here, and something that I haven't mentioned is the environmental challenges here. Jonathan writes, we're supposed to ignore the silly use of power and water these tools use, and also the theft of human labor that powers it, and explicit devaluing of human expertise. I think all of those are excellent points, and I just kind of want to draw attention to them. And I think that that's such an interesting point around the tensions that a lot of us are dealing with right now. In terms of the environment, I do think we need to locate digital use overall and think about its environmental impact rather than only AI. I agree that AI does have an environmental impact. We're seeing more and more about that. But I think also we have a whole digital ecosystem that we haven't asked a lot of questions about in terms of environmental use. We know that these server farms are getting rapidly bigger, but we also know it's not only AI, it's also streaming. It's also how, cloud-based use, etc. But absolutely, I think locating AI in this, thinking about the human labor, and thinking that you're going to have students that have a similar view expressed in this comment. And we need to think about how we're going to appreciate what students say and ensure that they're still an equitable part of the learning space. Jeffrey Turner asks, can you ask ChatGPT to critique the French translation and suggest improvements? That's a funny question. I could, but I wouldn't know that if it did it properly or told me the truth about that critique. And that brings up a lot of questions around truthiness of those tools. Wonderful. So I'm just looking through the comments as you're chatting. And I'm just going to give you a couple more minutes on this. And I'm loving some of these critical statements, the idea of more misinformation on the internet. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing all of this. And I'm going to, I'd like to hear from a couple people now about what their experience was using AI as a tutor, and also kind of what their thoughts are around this potential movement from textual-based knowledge to dialogical-based knowledge. Does anyone want to try to unmute themselves and kind of share that way? Or you can also share in the chat if you would prefer. I'm just taking a look in the chat at what some of you found. Copilot switched to open-ended questions. Thank you. Wonderful. So thanks for sharing all of that. And again, I think that's a helpful way to think about the potential futures of these tools. We're already seeing some evolution happening with the publishers and AI. And this is something that I've found in the open space since I started working in it, is often while the open education community thinks about one thing, publishers are working in another space. So for example, as the open education community came together and developed open textbooks and OER, the publishers were already moving into more interactive textbooks and ancillary course resources. I feel the same things are happening now with AI a little bit, as we're thinking about creating textbook systems that are open source, etc. Publishers are starting to release AI inside their textbook, AI as separate tools, and often with students requiring to pay for these tools. So we're almost in this escalating situation of trying to find ways to make education more affordable and accessible for our learners. But I want to think again about the idea of open values and the values of OER that we talked about at the beginning. So from my perspective, AI is really changing the way we think about OER, and it's creating new spaces where publishers are going into, companies are going into, that are going to hinder affordability. As an open community, when the internet arose, I think the open education community was able to really think about student learning and really think about student access and equity and embed these values in OER and open education. We need to ask the same questions and think about the way that we're going to embed these same values within AI as it develops. So number one, how can AI be accessible and affordable? And this is a significant challenge, more than with OER because of the compute costs that are built into these AI tools. Yet, we're in a situation already now at the universities where, again, if students pay for a subscription model, they're going to have a very different experience with using AI than students who don't. So how are we going to think about more accessible and affordable generative AI systems for our students? Number two, how are we going to ensure that AI and generative AI is focused on teaching and learning? I think this is a challenge as educators, especially when we're often getting pitched with different tools. But how do we really think about locating these tools within the teaching and learning space? How do we think about equ equitable and inclusive education with generative AI? We know that, like the internet, these tools are biased. They have built-in structural bias, they have bias from guardrails. How do we help students work through these bias? How do we develop systems that are less biased for our learners? And how do we develop AI or aspects of AI in community? Again, community has been a big part of open education since the early days. So a couple ways we can think about AI and open values. Number one is open source AI and open source RAG or databases. Cory Doctorow talks about the term enshittification. Enshittification, if you're not aware of it, is how the internet constantly is changing in a way that has more cost barriers and generally is a worse user experience. So I think about when I first started my job, one of the things that we're talking about is social media, tools like Facebook, tools like Twitter, now X in teaching and learning. And what happened over about 10 years, 15 years, is those tools became paid. They became worse services in general. Their privacy degraded in some ways. So when we think about AI, I'm very concerned that if we're not using more open source AI, we're going to deal with the same enshittification. Right now, we have large AI companies like OpenAI that are significantly funded by venture capitalism and are not making much profit. And we know in the past what's happened is we've been given services relatively cheap. Over time, that they become more expensive. There's more tiers built into them. I think open source AI gives us an ability to have more control over those changes and make AI more cost effective for our students. Number two is transparency. The open education has always been very transparent in how it created resources, in how it's used resources. We need to think about how to bring that transparency and disclosure more into the AI space. How are we going to hold on to notions like attribution within this space as well? And that links to the next points is how are we going to determine authorship with AI generated text, with AI generated work, with AI generated OER. Number four, and this relates to teaching and learning, is how are we going to develop AI that is for students and faculty? One of the values of open text was it allowed faculty to take a publisher text and adapt it in a way that was for them. How are we going to think about AI for the students and for the faculty? And how can we develop communication and collaboration? At UBC in 2023, we had a promptathon where different faculty worked together to come up with prompts that they could use for generative AI. To me, that was an example of this collaboration. So how can we build in more of this collaboration? So I think it's kind of over to you as the open education community. How can we co-create, not just consume AI? I saw a couple great critical comments in the chat. I think all of these criticisms are very important right now, but how can we be part of the conversation and how can we co-create open source AI models, ways of using AI that allow us to bring those open values into it. And overall, how can we bring open practice to AI? And I think this is where some of the urgency is for me. Things are moving very fast. And as you know, many of the folks in Silicon Valley like to move fast and break things. How can we as an open education community think about how we can build up AI in a way that's effective and is aligned with our values. So that brings me to the end. I think we have a couple minutes for questions, and I'm also going to go through the chat now. Jeff, how much time do we have?
You have 10 minutes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
So questions, comments from the room.
Barbara would like to hear about co-creation that you just mentioned, and I would like to hear about that too. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I can give you a really specific example. So at UBC, the University of British Columbia, where I work, one of the choices that a couple of the units have made is rather than only using tools like ChatGPT, in British Columbia, we have some very significant privacy issues. Privacy laws that are very strict about how we can use these tools. We have created an open source tool using something called OLambda. OLambda uses different open source models to you can kind of plug them in and use as an AI. So we have this model open for faculty. They can only use it for projects that they run. So they actually have to be a grant project. And then they're able to use this and build it depending on their needs. So what they'll say is, well, I need an AI that creates chatbots like this. And they can work with our developers to create those specific chatbots for their area. This is just kind of a pilot and an experimentation phase. But to me, it's not saying we're going to take ChatGPT and see what the changes are. What we're saying is we're going to co-create an open source LLM, which in a way is made for you. It's being thought of as something for helpful for you. The other example I wanted to share is a little bit different. It's not open source, but I think it comes up with this. It helps me think about kind of frameworks and collaboration. And this is from the University of Sydney. Could I get a thumbs up in the chat if you've heard of Cogniti before? Just take a look, or sorry, not in the chat, just next to your name here. So Cogniti is a system developed out of the University of Sydney. And what they've done at the University of Sydney is they've downloaded ChatGPT. So they're hosting this in their servers. And they have created a agent or chatbot model for their entire university. So any faculty or staff member at their university can build chatbots and launch those chatbots into their course. And you'll see there's hundreds of different chatbots that faculty are building. So again, this isn't open source, but what it's done is rather than saying, here's your AI tool, it's given folks the flexibility of thinking about what their own chatbot might look like and developing it for their particular spaces. So those are a couple examples around co-creation that I was thinking about. How can we be part of the AI story right now? And again, open education almost created a second layer on the internet. I've been doing this for 15 years. I watched as social media, I think we could argue, became a bit of a dumpster fire. And we saw many aspects of the web change in ways that were not for the best necessarily, but we've seen tools like Wikipedia stay strong, stay quite useful. And we've also seen open education carving a space in the internet to bring out these values that we feel are important. Thanks for the question, Barbara. I hope that answered it. I'm just going to wait for some other questions and I'll take a look in the comments. Yeah, I like the Mike mentions I like the idea of delivering a set of AI prompts to students in addition to or instead of a textbook. It sounds like it would be good for active learning. That said, one of the upsides of textbooks is that all students see the same thing, so you can ask everyone the same quiz questions. How would you ensure consistency? That's a really good example. And that's a good challenge, I think, is suddenly we're dealing with everyone having unique information. And I think that's actually a really good opportunity to build in output evaluation in your prompt. Yes, you can use ChatGPT as a tutor to prompt, but what is a shared way as a class we're going to look into the information given and check it for accuracy, check it for the sources it was drawn from, kind of better understand it. Behrman, in her articles, talks about the importance of students developing evaluative judgment on AI output. So I think part of bringing it into the classroom as a tutoring tool is also developing ways of helping your students build evaluative judgment and kind of scaffolding their use of the tool.
Lucas,
Yeah.
we just have a few minutes left, but there's been some questions about critical thinking skills and how do we use AI to for critical thinking. So Arlene writes, how do we help students develop critical thinking skills if AI does all the problem solving? How do we help students maintain the skill base necessary to double check AI output?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if anyone's heard of the SIFT method. I'm just going to share this in a moment. Mike Caulfield developed this. One moment. So the SIFT method is one way that students can analyze AI content. I can share this in the worksheet afterwards. But the SIFT method kind of is a framework for students to think about what was generated with AI. Originally, it was developed for misinformation on the web. So stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, trace claims, quotes to media and the original context. So I think that is one way of helping students critically think about AI. And I think this critical thinking is something that students are also going to need and use in their day to day as they're going online, as they're trying to sift through this information and thinking about it. The other piece I wanted to talk about, you mentioned there, is critical thinking. And I think we're in a really challenging space with AI around critical thinking. And one of the challenges is AI creates a great shortcut. It can shortcut a lot of critical thinking. It can cut a lot of thinking in general. So how do we help our students use AI in a way that still builds on their critical thinking and they're using it in critical ways? And I wanted to share this study from Anthropic. Anthropic is the Amazon AI group. And what they studied 500,000 .edu accounts, so they were able to see the kind of queries students were using with AI. And what they found is that 50% of their students or the queries were for direct problem solving. Solve and explain differentiation problems in calculus, create academic text summaries and condensed versions. 50% were using AI in collaborative ways. So teach programming fundamentals with Python examples, provide feedback for revision for student writing assignments.
Okay.
So how do we
I'm
help
sorry.
students?
Excuse
Yeah.
me, Lucas. I have to remind the participants that the next session starts in 1 minute,
Oh, gee.
and I know this is a
Sorry about
huge
that.
topic. No, that's fine. And if you go to the upper right hand corner of the window, there's the Zoom events lobby. that will allow you to get into the next session. So my apologies for interrupting, Lucas.
No problem
Um,
at all.
yeah, and we
I can
thank you
sit in
very
here for a
much for
few
your work.
minutes if anyone wants to ask any further questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time. And I do think, there's been some great comments in the chat. I do think it's a really tricky subject right now. But I do think that in the way that we've thought about open education, we do have an opportunity to help create something that's more focused on teaching and learning and our students.
Right. With that, thank you, Lucas. And I'm on my way to go moderate another session. So thank you so much for your participation.
And if anyone's still in the room and has a question or two before they go to the other keynote, please feel free, jump in.
Lucas, what do you use to make chatbots with OER, and can they be embedded in Canvas?
Yeah, it's a good point. So the Cogniti system I showed you is out of University of Sydney. That can be embedded in Canvas. They actually have an LTI for that, which is pretty neat. Um, right now, I don't have anything I can use to actually embed. I use a tool called Poe, P-O-E, which I can build chatbots with different systems. So it can actually use Claude or ChatGPT, etc. But I have to share it with as a link, and then students need to log into Poe to use it. So right now there isn't anything good in my world where I can just create a chatbot and share it like that. I think actually sharing prompts is an even easier way right now, and until the chatbot infrastructure comes out a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions, comments? I don't know if Makina, are you still in here? Let's see. I don't think so. Okay.
She said yes.
What's that? Oh, Makina is still in here? Wonderful. So Makina had a quick question about professors using AI checkers for students' work. If an essay is AI generated, how do we find reliable checkers online? AI checking's a very controversial subject right now online. What they're finding with all the AI checkers is if you look at the research, there's a false positive range right now between 4 and 50%, depending on the study that you look at. So what this means is that many of these checkers have reliability problems. And that's why actually at UBC we don't allow for checkers. And a lot of institutions have made this choice because of false accusations with students using AI, as well as false negatives. So if a student wants to evade a checker now, they can use tools like humanizers that make the text read more humanly to evade them. So if checkers have high false positives and high false negatives, a lot of institutions have decided they can't use them ethically with their learners. And I think this has created, or it's contributed to a challenge for faculty.
For sure. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, no, it's a good, and I think checkers, at least for now, Makina, I'm also going to add that most studies don't evaluate human checking very well. Humans seem to be able to, the studies I've read, pick out about 50% of content that might be created by AI. but they're also going to have a lot of false positives. So currently, I would suggest we don't really have a way to check if something's been created by AI or not. And that's created a lot of angst, or, contributed to a lot of angst in higher ed.
Thanks so much, Lucas. I'm going to go ahead and close the
Yeah,
room. So
thanks.
if anybody needs to quickly grab the link in the chat, it will take you back to the lobby, hopefully for you to find the next sessions and go ahead and click the green start button to go in there. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank
So I
you.
really appreciate you staying and answering questions. Also, you can go to any one of the 3 sessions that started at 10. If you click on the purple bar that has
Oh,
sessions, you can
perfect. I'm
join
there
them.
now.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to end the session. See you in the next one.
Wonderful.